Welcome to Global Resources for Men. I am your host, Elysia Buss, and today I have the great pleasure of having Hunter Teets on, coming to us from Charlottesville, Virginia. He is a mental health counselor and works with men in his men's groups as well. And today he's going to talk to us about being brave in relationships, interdependency versus codependency, and finding Oasis within your relationship to help it be healthy during tough times. Hunter, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm excited to be here.
Okay, and thank you for your patience with our technical difficulties and unfortunate lack of people today.
Yeah, no worries.
So, yeah, tell us a bit about the difference of interdependency and codependency. I know we hear a lot about codependency, right? But we don't hear a lot about interdependency.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, like, we don't hear a lot about interdependency for it's like an older model of relationships being more siloed, or like that men do one piece and women do another piece, or one partner does one piece and another partner does another piece. But I think we also hear a lot about codependence. I think that gets thrown around a lot. And to me, the major difference is that when we're interdependent, that we can sort of work well and complement each other's strengths and sort of make up for each other's weaknesses. Um, and we can be with each other in ways that um, I don't know, that allow ourselves and our partner to like more fully express who they are. And when we're in codependency, it's this idea of like, I can't be okay unless you're okay. And
Right.
so there's a lot of pressure on the other partner to be okay, or between the couple to like function so that the appearance of being okay is still maintained, right? Um, and I think that yeah, in interdependence, there's real intimacy, and in codependence, there's this sort of like it might feel kind of better or look kind of better sometimes, but it's actually less healthy. So, um, yeah, and I think some of um, the main like signs of codependence, right, is um, if you're in conflict with your partner and there's blame coming back, right? That's a big one, that people can't tolerate the distress of um, feeling like things aren't okay or feeling like they're not okay. And so it comes out as blame rather than like seeking to understand the other person and to work together to address it. Um, and also, like, another kind of prominent sign of codependence is that sort of um, that there's not much conflict until there is, and then it gets super intense, right? That like sort of the things get explosive, and I think some of that is because in codependence there's not um, an ability to really tolerate the distress of like disconnection, or that I might have done something wrong, those kinds of things, and that it feels far more threatening. And then when we feel threatened, right, that's when we pull out the big guns and we say things that are hurtful. We kind of freak out, those kinds of things. And so those are some signs that you're might be interacting in a more codependent way, rather than an interdependent way. And interdependence is that kind of thing where it's like I might still hurt and feel sad when my partner is sad, but I'm doing that out of a sense of care for them, right? And that I can tolerate the discomfort of being sad, that I don't need them to make it up for me, and that I can really connect and be with them in their strong feelings. And I think all of us would experience that as being a lot more like rewarding and enriching to know that someone else cares about us, that they're moved by what's going on in our life and those kinds of things, that it's not just this reaction that's sort of pushing against what's happening for us. Um,
Definitely. That is like my idea of what healthy, mature masculinity would look like.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree that um it's interesting. So I think like historically we've had the idea that men are like more logical and better at handling emotional things and things like that. But the research is that like when men get distressed, their sort of physiological markers of distress go up higher than women on average and take longer to come back down. And I think that we sort of as a culture we haven't really taught men how to be with their emotions. And so I
Yeah.
think there is a lot of that, like, yeah, they're scared of their feelings or they don't know how to be with something is that doesn't feel super comfortable and connect with somebody about that, right? I think
Yeah.
a lot of men find that like they can do that in isolation, but not with other people too, which is sad.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the flip side of that, the healthy, mature femininity would be being able to control our emotions and hold that space for our partner and become less reactive, right? And so on either side, it's really about that definition of holding space.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like being grounded enough in yourself that you can be with someone who's having difficulty.
Yeah, and not taking it personally, which I think oftentimes is really difficult because most of the time I think when there's conflict, it's not so much about the other person, but really about like just the unhealed triggers within us and what we're mirroring with the law of assumption, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know what that is, you should definitely look it up later because it'll make you think about things a little bit when you think about the law of assumption. Uh just how we project things out in our world when we're assuming that something is a certain way. Could
Yeah.
be not that way at all. And then
Yeah.
then we have to take responsibility for how we show up, and that can be a little uncomfortable.
Yes, for sure.
Would you say that codependency falls within the realm oftentimes of people pleasing?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a big overlap there. That's a big way that people ensure someone else is okay, is that they kind of do everything that they think that person wants, right? Or anticipate that that person wants. And um, that can get us in trouble in a few ways, right? Is if we're anticipating someone's needs, but they aren't their actual needs, and we do them, we can get resentful, right? Of like, oh, I'm working so hard so that you feel better, but it's not actually what they want. Um,
Yeah.
and if we're prioritizing someone's needs and to kind of the exclusion of our own needs, that's another problem too, right? If we're just focusing on our partner and trying to make them happy or make them or like help them be calm, those kinds of things. Like, yeah, it doesn't work if that's how we our default, right? And how we often operate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sometimes it can be good to just be able to shelve our ego a little bit because we
Mm,
might be really want to be heard in that moment, but the other person might not be in a space to hear you, no matter how right you may or may not be. And being able to hold that space for that person and know that, like, oh, I can come back to my side and my needs being met maybe tomorrow. Right. So it's like you're not putting it off indefinitely. You're just really honoring the person that's in front of you, male or female, and being like, this is what this person needs right now to de escalate, to calm their nervous system, to come into a space where they actually can hear me, to have their needs met, etc. And we just make that sacrifice and surrender into that space and the love that we have for the other person.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to say that like sometimes to be in a relationship, it does mean that we have to put our needs on hold for yeah, to help our partner for a period of time, right? And that doing that indefinitely, right, doesn't work out. But
No, not
yeah,
indefinitely, just for like
yeah,
a short period of time.
right.
Like maybe that person is just like, okay, they're going, you give them, you acknowledge them, and they can come back within 10 minutes, maybe. Or maybe it's 2 hours, or maybe it's the next day, or just however long that is. But just really having that conversation, ideally preemptively before conflict happens, to be like, okay, like what's our plan to support each other, to advocate for our needs in that moment, or recognize when the other person is in a space that they just feel like, okay. I just need this, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like what you're saying about having that conversation ahead of time, because in the moment of conflict, right, it can be really hard to understand someone saying, I can't do that right now, right? But if that's something you've talked about beforehand,
Yeah.
and have an understanding that they're not saying like, hey, I'm out of here, I'm bailing on you, but they're saying, hey, I this is I'm not in a space where I can do this right now, I need a minute. That's a very different message, right? One is like brings up more fear right around like someone
Right.
abandoning us, those kinds of things. The
Totally.
other we can hopefully see in the light of like, yeah, they're doing that to protect their relationship, that they want to be in
Yes.
this conversation but no, they can't do it right now.
Yeah, because if you know that you're feeling irrational or that you're wrong targeting, and for those of you who are not familiar with that term, that like you're angry with this over here, but you're yelling at the person over here,
Yeah.
to just say, hey, like I care about you. And I know that when I'm in this space, I'm not necessarily going to be the nicest person. And that's not the person I want to be towards you, but I don't necessarily have the bandwidth to stop myself from being mean to you.
Yeah. 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 So good to be aware of that in ourselves too, right? Of like, can I be there for this person right now or not? And being,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So I feel like that leads into like that being brave in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think um partly with that, I want to say like oftentimes in my life, at least, I found fear to be a really helpful guide. Um, and that there is this sort of sweet spot of fear that if there's too little, right, then what I'm doing isn't exciting, isn't challenging enough, and that's not all that interesting. If it's too much,
Complacency.
what's that?
It's a
Yeah,
complacency.
yeah, for sure. But if fear is too high, right, then I'm not operating very well either. And like when we're afraid in a pretty significant way, we do start to shut down, right? And sort of get more focused on just like, what do I need in this moment to survive? Not like, oh, can I learn what's new here? So finding that sweet spot of fear is really important. And along with that, I think um, another way that men are kind of socialized, right, is to be either kind of timid, like a good guy, a nice guy, to be in that place of like not enough fear, or to be reckless, right? And just to like push past being afraid in a way that ends up causing harm. And like I see that in my own life, that I have like a couple of cracked vertebrae that are attached to that. One was like boogie boarding at a beach in Southern California called the Wedge, right? And like I did that as a middle schooler, and I shouldn't have been there. The waves crash like pretty intensely on the steep beach, and I was kind of lucky that I wasn't paralyzed. Um,
Yikes.
yeah, and then another time snowboarding, like hitting the big jumps in the train park before I was ready, and like landing really badly on my back and hip, and um, yeah, not like being honest with myself about my ability and also like where I was in the process. But I think that definitely happens in relationships too, is that like we have something that we want to share with our partner and we dive in and maybe have like different expectations of how much they'll be able to hear, those kinds of things.
Right.
And then we feel kind of stung by like, oh, we weren't received in the way that we hoped. And so being able to find that place of like, oh, this feels a little scary to share, but it's not like the scariest thing I have to say, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna just like come out with that all at once. So finding those ways to be to notice what we might be afraid to share with our partner, and starting to find ways that we can have those conversations and be in relationship with them around these like more vulnerable places in our lives.
Absolutely. So if somebody is struggling to find that space, like what the balance would be between those two things, what would be the advice that you could give them?
So I think one of the things is just to notice in yourself, like, what are you tempted to hide, or what do you desire to hide? Um, and start to explore, like, what would it be like to share this with this person I love and care about, and to just kind of either sort of like practice having that conversation. Sometimes like doing that in our head doesn't work very well, but like writing out some things we might want to say and then coming back and looking at that and um yeah, finding a way in to start to share.
I know. That reminds me of something I think that is important that we don't really talk about that much in society, which is finding the balance between privacy and oversharing.
Yeah.
Since you talked
Yeah.
about like that feeling of like hiding and whatnot, because it's totally okay to be a private person and it's okay to find like be really transparent, but finding the people of which like it's appropriate. Just like if you go to the library, you're supposed to be quiet. If you're at a rock concert, you're going to be loud. If you go to pick up your kid at school, you're probably not going to swear. If you're at church, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not that you're right. It's not that you're being false. You're just accessing a different part of yourself and holding the boundaries and acting appropriately. So like finding that same sort of principle within privacy to what overshare is and why we overshare into like trauma bonding, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, I appreciate that discussion around privacy because I think, like, yeah, there are some people in our lives who might feel entitled to know things about us, right? And that's still our decision, right? We get to decide how close a person comes to us, right? They might want to be closer than we let them, but that is definitely our decision. And yeah, you don't have to be like harsh about it, but can just sort of pick and choose, like, yeah, who is allowed, who is like trustworthy to be in that place in my life. And yeah, I think it is interesting because I think the temptation, right, that like we are all, I think, kind of starved for intimacy, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
loneliness that is going on right now, and so I think there is this urgency to like share really fast with people, right, or like to find someone you kind of click with and then share a lot. And sometimes that works out, and sometimes, right, that
And
that
sometimes
gets
the
kind of
trauma
tainted.
bonding happens.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that there is that really close connection, but it's not as healthy or as stable as we hope.
So very true. Um, yeah, and I think sometimes with the privacy, people struggle with that feeling of, am I like overtly lying because I'm not sharing something when somebody asks me? Right?
Right.
That withholding in that conversation. And that feeling probably falls into line more when people are pushing one's boundaries
Hmm.
and projecting things onto them. And then you start
Yeah.
to question, be like, well, is it okay for me to like hold on to this? Is it not? And I think the more we start having those conversations and honoring like where we're at inside of ourselves and just be like, hey, like I'm not ready. And I may or may not at some point be ready and trust you enough to go into that and or have the bandwidth for a particular conversation because those more private things oftentimes take more bandwidth for us to address
Hmm.
in conversation with people. So just to the point of the whole being brave situation.
Yeah. Yeah, that is brave to sort of to say no, right? If someone is pushing us to
Yes, to
disclose
say
more than we
no.
want to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, to advocate for our needs and our desires and our boundaries. Because we talk about like advocating for our needs, but we don't necessarily always advocate for our boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a little paradoxical, but like if someone does more clearly tell me no or tell me about their boundaries, I can feel a lot closer to them because I can trust that, like, oh, I don't have to um, monitor what I'm asking, those kinds of things, that like they'll really just tell me when it's like, oh, hey, that is too much, or I'm not ready to do that yet, right? If they can tell me that, then I can feel more confident leaning into what I want to share, right? And just
Yeah,
knowing that, oh, yeah, like if it's too much, they'll tell me. I think that's super important.
absolutely. Yeah, and that whole like red, yellow, green. aspect, being like, I'm good with this. I'm starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable with this, and like it starts to get a little muddy, and then you're like, red, hard stop. No, I'm not having that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in finding that oasis with your relationship and like making sure things are healthy in tough times, tell us more about that.
Yeah. So partly or mostly what I mean is being able to find um like little pieces of what we need. And I think a lot of times when things are difficult, we sort of have this idea like, oh, I need a week away, right? Where I can just like rest and recharge and things like that. And sadly, like life doesn't offer us that opportunity a lot. So yeah, being able to find those little places of um like connection or rest or those kinds of things that can sustain us, right? 'Cause that is like an oasis is this like beautiful resting place in the middle of a desert, right? That it's a
Mhm.
small space and it's not somewhere that you would live, right? But it's somewhere that can
Not want to
help
live there.
you, yeah, get to the next oasis and the next one until you're getting where you're trying to go. Um, and so it's even like there are little things like with a romantic partner, there's something that a lot of therapists recommend called the three breath hug. And that's like when you come in after being apart, that you hug and you take three deep breaths together as a
Mm,
way of just like finding a little bit of connection and closeness. And I think little things like that are more important than we know. Just like can also like set the tone for an evening, right? If you come in and connect that way,
right.
then it's easier to have to be like more relaxed in the space with your partner and feel more closeness and connection, those kinds of things. Um, and finding times of just like, yeah, like maybe being able to hold hands or kiss or these kinds of things that like aren't like, oh yeah, we're gonna go on a vacation, leave the kids and like get to be together, but we're gonna be able to, I don't know, have some time together in this way that feels close and connecting. And it's not everything we want, but it is really important to do these little things over time, right? So that when we do have the space, that it's not um so foreign to us again, right? That we don't we're not feeling estranged from our partner and have to do a lot of work to connect again before that's
Yeah.
available.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And also just healthy role modeling for your children if you have them. Like the importance
Yeah,
of like modeling healthy intimacy for your children.
yeah, yeah.
And on that point, in regards to intimacy, I hear a lot of late that people are struggling with advocating for nurturing over sex, especially
Mhm.
initially in dating. Like, how do you create that conversation piece? Because, we've all heard Netflix and chill, but like some of us really do want to like just have nurturing in that situation and not
Yeah,
have it turn into sex. Men and women, it's not just one side.
yeah,
But yeah, what would be your advice in having those initial conversations?
yeah. So again, I think a little bit of that comes back to bravery of just saying, like, yeah, that those talking about sex is usually uncomfortable, and to be clear of like, yeah, that's not what I'm looking for tonight, or like, I'm not ready for that yet in this relationship, those kinds of things. And it's this is kind of related, but I think we have different models of consent, and we don't always know um, if they're the same or different, right, with someone that we're interacting with. So there's like the no means no model of consent, right? And that's like in broad brushes, like most heterosexual relationships fall in that. The no means no is that like one partner, like traditionally the man, kind of pursues, and then if that's unwelcome, the other partner says no, and you kind of go from there, right? And that's that negotiation. And then there's the kind of enthusiastic consent model, right? Where it's like you ask for everything, right? Oh, can I hold your hand? Is it okay if I kiss you? That kind of thing. And that like maybe in broad brushstrokes again tends to happen more in like lesbian relationships or queer relationships. Although in gay relationships, like gay male relationships, it's more of a no means no kind of
Same.
thing. So all that to say, I think, is that we have different expectations maybe around our conversations about sex that it's not comfortable to talk about. So if we're assuming that someone is going to be like in this enthusiastic consent and really checking in, and they're not doing that, right? Then um, that can create problems. And so to know, like, to be on the same page about that is really important. And also to have some awareness and know, like, yeah, if someone is pursuing me and starting to be physical with me in a way that I don't want to do, I might freeze up, right? And if that's the case, um, really being able to communicate with that with a partner ahead of time, and yeah, that like um, just being more clear about those things is kind of scary and uncomfortable, but it's definitely the best way to like, yeah, to like make sure we have our needs met and our boundaries respected.
Yeah, definitely. And especially if you've experienced physical or sexual trauma, it can be even more important to just check in with somebody about like what's going on. I mean, like you don't need to explicitly like lay out the entire traumatic event with them, but just being like, hey, I might be more sensitive on this day or in this area of my body or with this particular type of touch or activity. And just having that space to communicate and give people some autonomy in regards
Hmm.
to how they're engaging with one another, as well as personal like responsibility of like
Yeah,
not
yeah,
assuming that like this person in front of you that may not really know you very well is going to be able to read every little bit about you without you opening your mouth.
right. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
On either side, again.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And that just remind me of something, but now I'm kind of forgetting. Um, oh yeah, the idea that like you can be ambiguous about things, right? That like, yeah, like this day might be a little difficult for me, or this like touch in this area is something that I don't totally like, and you don't have to explain why, right? And yeah, being able to sort of set that boundary, I think, is important too. That like people aren't entitled to know exactly why, and it's a good sign if your partner can tolerate that ambiguity, right? Of like they don't have to know, but they can just hear you say that and respect it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for some people, especially if it's a physical injury and whatnot, some sort of compromised area of their body, they might um feel shame or consideration or like they feel bad because they want to show up in a certain way, but they might not feel like they can. And so meeting that conversation with like tenderness and like patience and grace and like being more like affirming that it is okay and you are interested in engaging and you're able to work with them in whatever way to check in is important.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't think we talk about that enough either because people can just be compromised within themselves for all different kinds of reasons and sicknesses, headaches, pain,
Yeah,
surgery, injury, like whatever it is, and just continue to open up that communication cycle and take people for where they're at. Because maybe a man or a woman could show up and just be like, I really just, can you just give me like a head massage and just like
yeah,
gently touch my arms and like through my chest and stuff like that? I just need softness. I need to calm my nervous system. It's been a rough day. And that's even if you don't really know somebody very well, because that's just kindness and sweetness and nurturing that our society doesn't really model for us as much. I don't know how many men I've talked to over the course of my life that are just like, I would really just love somebody to just like play with my hair and let me just like lay with my head in their lap and just be calm and nurtured. And just that's enough.
yeah.
But they don't know how to advocate for that because asking for softness can be a challenge.
Can be. Yeah, yeah. And like between men has historically, right, been really problematic in the US that we have this long history of homophobia. And so like maybe if you're in Europe, right, there's a lot more affection between men, or certainly I don't know, I did some traveling in Mali in West Africa, and the translator and I, we would just hold hands as we were walking around, right? And that's not something that happens so much here in the US, but it does feel really comfortable and like was reassuring, right? As I'm in this like foreign country and pretty far out of my comfort zone to have someone just holding on to me. And yeah.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And it is important because it's interesting that we have this double standard, right? Like if we see two women holding hands, we don't think anything of it really most of the time. And then the two men holding hands, you're like, oh, that's odd. Or if two men were being nurturing and like playing with each other's hair, like being caressing like that, we automatically assume that they're, gay
Yeah.
and not just allowing them to be human.
Right.
Because as human beings, we need touch and connection. And that intimacy doesn't need to be sexual,
Yeah.
bringing that
Yeah,
humanness back to intimacy.
for sure.
Because it's like at
Yeah.
what point when we're kids, because like when little boys are together, they still hold hands and they still give each other
Yeah.
hugs and like get all snuggly and all that different stuff because they don't have any of those thoughts and considerations. Like at what point do we grow up and it's no longer acceptable?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it starts early, certainly by like kindergarten. That's you're getting teased and made fun of for that, right?
Oh,
Yeah. And
it's so
I
funny.
think and I hope that that's changing, but yeah, I can um I don't know if I have any distinct memories of that in my own life, but um yeah, I have just seen it in the context I've been in, like residential schools and things like that, where it's pretty young that boys are made fun of for crying and wanting connection
Mhm.
and those kinds of things.
That's so unfortunate. And I talk to adults. I've been talking to some of my female friends who are like high level entrepreneurs, and we've been joking that we're going to have a slumber party because we
Yeah,
just we just want to come together and be like kids and play with each other's hair and like watch movies and eat popcorn and just like be silly. Because as adults, I feel like we just don't have the opportunity to play as much. Because again,
yeah,
at some point, like that stopped being okay or the norm. And it's just like, well, why can't we just be human and be silly and be connected and like let go of all these expectations and considerations that we have? And I don't see why men can do that too. I mean, like, although it would be interesting, I'm like, guys having a sleepover. Isn't that like you guys camping? Isn't men
yeah,
camping like
yeah,
the
yeah.
same version of like women having sleepover?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know, that is like with a lot of my close friends, right? We've gone backpacking together or yeah, I've been camping like these times where you do get to be away from um just those kinds of pressures or like ideas for a little while. And it is really freeing.
Yeah. We have one person watching. I don't know who it is. Do you have any comments or questions that we can ask here this afternoon? Feel free to pop it in the comment section if you would like. Uh, yeah, we're coming close to the end of our time together, Hunter. Is there anything you would like to add to the topics that we covered today?
Um well, so yeah, I think kind of coming back to that idea of being brave, and that fear can really be a good teacher. Um, and when we can start to see fear that way, then life gets more interesting, right? That like
For sure.
the things that we're afraid of is usually where like the magic and the transformation can happen. And so just I want to really encourage people to start to look at that and kind of make friends with fear and start to do things that challenge them a little bit and that um where they break out of their typical patterns and try something new, because that is yeah oftentimes where we find um something that is more than we expected.
Absolutely. And I think doing that in the form of like micro goals and then getting to celebrate yourself with the accomplishment of each of those micro goals that you do and just like slowly build at a healthy gradient. So you're not like, oh, I'm going to jump in the deep end. And then it's like, I never
Yeah.
want to do this again.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. And for men, it's interesting that like, I don't know, some male spaces are super competitive, right? But I think in Charlottesville at least, and in other places I've lived, that the there are like there's a huge mountain biking club and everyone's super welcoming, right? They're just like excited that you like something they like and really helpful, things like that. So partly it can be good to find a space where you're more likely to have success, right? That like that you're the risks you take are more likely to go well and be rewarded.
I really appreciate you saying that because it reminds me of how so many adults are struggling to make friends as adults. And one of the key factors that I tell people is like, figure out what you enjoy. Because sometimes people have gotten so caught up in being business owners, being parents, in their career, whatever that is, that they've forgotten what fun is.
Yeah.
And so you have to rediscover that for yourself. And then there's so many different groups of people that are doing like everything. Like, and if you can't find somebody doing what you're doing, you should just create your own group and then other people will find it.
Yeah.
So that's how that usually goes. Is taking
Yeah.
that step because I think there's great people everywhere. I think the percentage of people who are not good people is actually quite small. But we've gotten so scared of talking to people and listening to our intuition that it makes it more difficult to put ourselves out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And also afraid of looking foolish or making mistakes, right? Those kinds of things. And yeah, that when you do something new or do something that is like, "Oh, I used to do this years ago, right? But don't do it anymore. We're going to do it badly at first, and that's okay."
Yeah,
And giving ourselves the grace to say, yeah, like that's how it goes. That's how you learn, right? And that's all right.
absolutely. I like to tell people that we were all beginners at one point,
Yeah.
and then you got to be good at something or great at something
Yeah.
the more you did it. So, Hunter, thank you so much for your time, your candor, and your wisdom today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Where can people find you?
Probably the easiest place is my website, which is lifecounselingva.com. And my name is fairly distinct, so Hunter Teets. If you search that in Google, you'll find some way to connect.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Well, until next time, we will see you gentlemen later. And don't forget that we do have the men's life coaching membership at globalresourcesformen.com. And we will have lots of men on to do the group coaching calls each week next month as we focus on the overarching theme of fatherhood. Take care. Bye, everybody.